So again, thank you for attending the cybersecurity for the SMB and Startup Entrepreneur. My name is Jonathan Beck. I'm the owner of Piedmont Technical Experts, and I'll be taking you through this presentation today. So our objectives today, we've got a pretty long list, but I promise to get to any questions that you may have. I'll go over a brief introduction of myself as well as Piedmont Technical Experts. I will also be talking to you about how to calculate your downtime, covering some cybersecurity myths, understanding the evolving landscape of cybersecurity, talk about some best practices for securing your network and data. We'll talk about passwords. We'll also talk about the importance of user education. And then we'll talk about how to effectively respond to cyber incidents, and then we'll wrap up with some questions. All right, and with that, we'll dive right in. My name is Jonathan Beck. I've been in IT and IT security now for about 23 years, almost 24. I've worked in varied environments in multiple business verticals and business sizes, everything from single person shops all the way up to about 1,500 to 2,000 users. Piedmont Technical Experts was founded in 2021, and our focus is on the SMB market as well as startup businesses. So moving right along, in order to calculate your downtime, it is basically three values that you're looking at. You're looking at lost productivity, lost revenue, and the cleanup costs. So lost productivity is the number of employees that is impacted by the event, the percentage at which their productivity has been impacted. It could be, they're able to work on other things, but they're slower at it without a computer. So then maybe that's a 50% productivity loss. Maybe they can't do their job at all without a computer, and then that would be 100% productivity loss. Then you multiply that by the average hourly pay, and then you multiply that by the number of hours that you're down. Lost revenue is your gross revenue divided by your total business hours, times the percent of irrecoverable business. That's business that you just lost because they went down the street, or you lost because of loss of confidence because your business was breached. And then you also multiply that by the number of hours that you're down. Cleanup costs, I've got internal cleanup and external cleanup, even though really the math is the same. It's hours times rate. So if you have an internal IT resource, it's their hourly rate times the number of hours it takes them to clean up. An external resource is going to be the same math, but from a pricing standpoint, typically what I've seen in the marketplace for ransomware or virus cleanups, it's typically between $100 to $200 per hour, just in the North Carolina market alone. All right, so to give you an example of what the downtime would look like, if we take a sole entrepreneur who's taking home $100,000 a year in salary, they have $300,000 in revenue, and they work an 8-hour day. They have a 240 work day per year, which is kind of the average number of work days in a year. They lost 10% of their business, and it took 4 hours for an external resource to handle the recovery. So this person's downtime just from lost productivity was $208. The lost revenue to the business was approximately $125, and the labor rate for cleanup using the low end of $100 an hour would be $400 for the cleanup, which means that one downtime event costs that business $733. Now that starts to scale up pretty quick as you add machines and different productivity loss events. So you can use this math. They also have calculators on the internet that will help you calculate your downtime, but it basically follows the same pattern for measuring productivity, revenue, and cleanup. All right. So let's talk about some cybersecurity myths. The one that I often hear is that cybercrime is a problem for large organizations and not that sole entrepreneur. Well, the truth is that about 60% of all cybercrime last year impacted the SMB market. For a lot of cyber criminals, small businesses make good targets because they believe that cybersecurity is too expensive, or they believe that cybercrime is only issued for large organizations. A lot of times, cybercrime is just a crime of opportunity. So if a cyber criminal can get into your network and not my network, they're going to go after whoever they can access or whoever they can exploit. All right. Cybersecurity myth number 2, hackers target their victims. So just like on the last slide, where I said that cybercrime is a crime of opportunity, a lot of times what hackers do is they just start port scanning. That basically means they start pinging IP addresses to see which ones are going to respond. They're going to do basic attacks on a network. And if they can get into one person's network and not another person's, they're going to attack the one they can get into. They're not going to waste a lot of time trying to get into someone's network that has done a decent job of protecting themselves. And cybersecurity myth number 3, cybersecurity is too expensive for small businesses. Well, it's true, there's cost to cybersecurity. But ultimately, it's a balance between protection and risk acceptance. A small but good cybersecurity solution could be as little as a few $100s per year. Now, on the other end, obviously, if you put in every piece of cybersecurity equipment that you could, you would be talking about thousands of dollars a month, maybe tens of thousands of dollars a month. So yes, there is a wide range of cybersecurity prices out there, but to have a good protection, you could easily do this on a small office environment for a few $100s, either a month or per year, depending on the size of the environment. With that said, I go back to calculating your downtime. And the reason I always ask people to calculate what their downtime is because I typically recommend that a person's cybersecurity budget should be the same as having 1 or 2 downtime events per year. Because if you invest that money into protection and can prevent 1 to 2 attacks per year, then that protection has paid for itself in full. So I want you to have a return on your investment. So always kind of approach things with really, what does it cost my business to be down because my computers aren't working? All right. So this is just a picture of cyber targets and cyber attacks. What you'll see is in this diagram, China is the country that produces the most cyber attack origins. However, the target of most cyber attacks is the United States. That means, just having a US-based IP address, all of a sudden, you're more likely to be attacked than, say, someone in Argentina or Brazil or Hong Kong, for instance, than just being in the US. The US is definitely the target for most cyber crime. So let's move on and talk about the evolving landscape of cybercrime. All right. When I first started in IT and IT security, some 23 and a half years ago, pretty much people thought you were pretty well protected if you ran traditional antivirus and you did your software updates, your Windows patches, things like that. And for the most part, you were, because the Windows patches would take care of vulnerabilities on the workstation, AV would catch viruses, things of that nature. It wasn't foolproof, but it was certainly deemed that you were doing your due diligence. Now, fast forward to a few years ago, typically what the industry was seeing at that time was that traditional antivirus, that's definition-based antivirus, was starting to leave the market. What was probably the majority of the market share was something called EP, or endpoint protection. This was still definition-based antivirus, but it was multiple engines, and there was some behavior-driven analytics that went along with it for protection. And then if you were kind of on the cutting edge a few years ago, you'd be deploying endpoint detection and response, or EDR. This is an artificial intelligence-driven antivirus solution. It is not driven by definition files. It doesn't need to know about a virus in order to protect you from it. Basically, what it's looking for is bad behavior. And if you all of a sudden start sending out 1,000 emails a second, it's going to shut that process down and stop you from sending those thousands of emails. Or if it sees you start encrypting a bunch of files on your computers, it's going to stop that. The other nice thing about EDR is that it is going to give you a remediation path to potentially even roll back your machine pre-infection state. You would still be doing software updates, and you would also be running some form of firewall, pretty much an enterprise-grade firewall, something like a SonicWall, Meraki, Cisco, Checkpoint, the common names within the firewall industry. Now, where do you need to go today in order to be well protected? If you look at this from the perspective of what would it take to have, or what do you need to have in place for your cyber liability insurance to pay out? They're going to make sure that you're doing your due diligence. And if you're not, you're either going to pay a higher rate, or they may deny your claim when you file one. So you definitely have to be running EDR. If you're not, you need to be. Tons of vendors out there. You'd be running DNS filtering, especially if you were had remote workforce. You would potentially just be doing content filtering off your firewall if everyone was in brick and mortar buildings. You would have advanced threat protection. This would be to protect your email environment. This is going to scan your mail before it gets to your email box. It's going to filter out spam, phishing attacks, and malware. You're going to have some kind of compliance monitoring system in place. This would be systems of checks and balances where you can put evidence in that you, A, have EDR in place, B, are checking the logs from the EDR console, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. And this way, when you make a claim, they can say, well, show me the proof that you're doing those things. You can direct them to this console and provide them auditor access to that, and they can see that you're doing the pieces that are needed to say that you are doing your due diligence. User training, especially on the cybersecurity side, ongoing user training, whether it's in the form of videos, talks, phishing tests, etc., definitely a requirement by today's standards. You would still be doing patch management. You would probably also be adding in some system monitoring of some kind to make sure hardware is in good working order and none of the processes seem to be running out of control. Additionally, not in this list, but we were building off of what we were doing in previous steps. So things like firewalls also still very relevant and very needed, especially for brick and mortar environments. So we talked about the pieces that you need to have in place, and we'll go over those a little bit more as we go through the presentation here. But we will need to identify some vulnerabilities and entry points into our environment to make sure that we protect against those. So external threats, that would be things like malware, hackers, phishing, spear phishing, and improperly configured or not having a firewall. So the difference between phishing and spear phishing is that phishing is going to be an email like, I'm a lawyer from John Doe law firm, and I hate to tell you, but you have a long lost relative that died and they left you $1 million. Click this link, fill out all the information we need, including a credit card number, and we will direct deposit the funds into your account directly. That just does not happen. Basically, they are fishing for all your information and possibly a credit card number so they can rack up some charges. Spear phishing is going to be a little bit harder to detect because it may involve another form of attack along with it. An example that we've had locally in our area is a CEO's email got compromised through a hack. Then they set up a email to the company controller saying, send X amount of dollars to this account and we'll get this huge huge contract for our business. That was done. The controller did not question that and processed the order, except the CEO never actually sent that email. His email account did, but it was because his password got compromised. So that's kind of the difference between phishing and spear phishing. Spear phishing is targeting a specific user. Phishing attacks are more broad-based. Internal threats that you potentially have to worry about are disgruntled employees or undertrained employees, because disgruntled employees are not going to care if they click on a bad link, and undertrained employees are not going to know that they clicked on a bad link. Additionally, you have to be concerned about people stealing intellectual property from your company, and also misuse of company systems can result in contracting malware into your environment, get your accounts on the dark web where they can be purchased, and further attacks take place on them. All right, so some best practices for securing your network and your data. So preventative protections would include routinely running vulnerability scans. So if you fall under any kind of compliance standards, whether it's PCI, HIPAA, or SOC 2, the routine nature of vulnerability scans is defined as annual or as significant system changes occur. They don't really go into what a significant system change is, but typically that's going to be things like changing your firewall out, doing a hardware refresh of any magnitude above like 1 or 2 machines, things of that nature. You will perform network and security audits. Again, the frequency is really determined by the business, but if there's a compliance standard, it's typically 1 year or as significant system changes occur. The last preventative measure that you want to have in place is backups. This is both backups of critical workstations, servers, and cloud environments that you may have. The backups that Google and Microsoft do for like their email systems are designed if Microsoft or Google have a disaster. They're not really designed for an individual company being hit by ransomware. There's a lot of manual cleanup using their system to recover your email. External protections that you want to have in place would include a firewall, especially if you're a brick and mortar store. You would want some kind of VPN, whether that is a direct to internet VPN like NordVPN or NordLayer as two examples, or if you had a firewall, a VPN connection back to that firewall. Additionally, IPS and IDS. IPS is intrusion prevention system, and IDS is intrusion detection system. And they do exactly what they say they're what they stand for. And an IPS system is going to prevent an intrusion, and an IDS system is going to detect that there was an attempted breach or there was a breach. Internal protections include properly configured computers. That means not giving users keys to the kingdom. Administrator rights should be given out sparingly, even to the PCs, because restricted user access has a harder time executing certain programs, so they are less likely to be able to install a virus. Properly secured files. Again, if somebody doesn't need access to a file in order to do their job, don't give them access to it. Because in the realm of ransomware, basically what happens is the virus gets onto a computer, then it scans the network and starts encrypting all the files that that computer and that user had access to. So if they have full control over all the files that you have on your file server or out in SharePoint, all those files or folders got encrypted by ransomware. Proper usage and configuration of cloud systems. Again, this goes back to permissions a lot of times. You only want to give people access to what they need. You need to use external sharing sparingly, only as on a case-by-case basis. And typically you want to isolate that data that you're sharing with the external organization to just what they need. You don't want to create a share under a SharePoint site that your entire company uses and then share out to an external organization. You probably want to have a dedicated SharePoint site just to the sharing of data with external resources. Again, we kind of beat the EDR horse a bit today, but having an EDR solution in place, definitely valuable. DNS filtering, especially for your remote workforce or if you have a hybrid workforce. Advanced threat protection. Again, we talked about that with the spam filtering, with phishing and malware awareness, security awareness training. All the protections in the world don't mean anything if your user clicks a link and just downloads a virus. You want to keep records of all your protections and testings. You're going to have VPN software, and I highly recommend avoiding public Wi-Fi without some kind of VPN software. If you're going down the street to a local coffee shop and connect to their free Wi-Fi, that's all well and good for productivity. However, hackers and malware writers know this too, so they can go into that same coffee shop and scan the network for open computers. So that's why I typically recommend that if you're going to use a public Wi-Fi, have VPN software that's going to encrypt your traffic, number one. And if you're not able to do that, then I would recommend tethering to your cell phone or use a MiFi hotspot. All right, so password best practices. I won't go too deep into this, other than to say, if your passwords are on Post-it notes, on your monitor, under your keyboard, under your mouse pad, or in your pen drawer, I highly recommend making some improvements there as far as password storage and password protection. The other thing that I want to talk about is avoiding common passwords. The most common password that there is on the internet today is password. I run into at least 2 or 3 potential clients or clients a day that say, hey, I'm super sneaky. I've got my password set to password. No one's going to think about that. The problem is that everybody thinks that. So in password crackers, it's one of the first passwords that they try. So typically what I tell people is, if it's the default password, change it and don't use any variation of the word password as your password. As far as how often you should change your password, that is partially dependent on any compliance standards that you may have to follow. But typically, I recommend that everybody change their passwords that don't have a compliance policy every 3 to 6 months. Typically, if you have a compliance policy, it's either going to be 60 or 90 days for a password change. And lastly, have a unique password for every system that you log into. That's websites, that is computers, etc. Because you don't want your bank account information to be compromised just because your Facebook account got compromised. So yes, as a result, one of the other recommendations for passwords is to use a password manager that's going to store your passwords securely in a vault, and it will also help you generate secure passwords each time you register for a new site, and it'll tell you that this password needs to be changed ever so often, and then it will help you with the process of changing that password. Additionally, implementing multi-factor authentication is also a crucial piece of this mix, because ultimately any password can be hacked, no matter if it's complex. If you do all the things above, every single password can be hacked. It's just a matter of time. So the way to protect yourself or give yourself another layer of protection is to implement multi-factor authentication. This is where you would get a push to your cell phone, or you would be using an app like Duo or Okta that is going to give you a 6-digit code to type in, or a push notification to approve a sign-in. And that gives you an additional layer of protection, because just hacking your password isn't going to be enough now to get into your account. All right, so user education. I kind of touched briefly on this. So most compliance standards require at least annual cybersecurity awareness training. That training can take the form of videos, documents, talks, or testing. A really great cybersecurity awareness training program is probably going to include all of these elements. And it's going to be an ongoing event. It won't be annual. It'll probably be more like monthly or potentially even weekly, especially if you're doing something with like micro video training or something like that, where it's 2-minute videos and 4-question quizzes or something like that. All right. So we did all the things that we talked about up to this point, and we still got hit. What do we do? Well, that's where the incident response plan comes into play. Before the incident, we're going to have an incident response plan. This is basically the document that says who's doing what, who's allowed to say what, and this is how we're going to respond to any incident that comes in. We're also going to test that plan. It should be second nature to everyone on the incident response team, so that if an incident is declared, everyone knows what they're doing. So the incident happens. The number one thing to do is stay calm. Panic is not going to make things go better. Oftentimes, it's going to make things go worse. So we want to identify the issue. We want to isolate the issue. We want to send out notifications while we're in the process of isolating and remediating to all impacted employees. The message should dictate what they can and can't say during the event. It should also say what they can and can't do during the event. It may be that they need to shut down their computers and go home for the day, as long as it's communicated out. Once the isolation occurs, then the remediation starts. That's the cleanup process. Once everything's cleaned up, then we move into the post-incident response. The most important part of that will be the root cause analysis. We have all these protections in place. How did this happen? We're also going to want to do an impact analysis. What did it cost us to be down during this event? Next would be notifications. This will be to internal staff, as well as potentially impacted clients and customers. My typical recommendation is there is nothing worse than telling a client that they had their personal information compromised, except for having the client find out that their personal information was compromised and you didn't tell them. And then the final piece of the post-incident cleanup is going to be coming up with a prevention plan and implementing that plan to prevent future attacks of a similar nature. All right, and then we will move straight into the question section. Are there any questions as far as cybersecurity or specific examples that you want to discuss? I am definitely open to any questions. All right, with that, I'm going to stop the recording. I appreciate your time today. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions related to cybersecurity or IT services. We will be happy to have a conversation with you. Contact information is on the screen. It's also available on our website, which is PiedmontTechnicalExperts.com. And our phone number is on there as well. You can do option 1 for support or option 3 for sales, and we can help coordinate you with the right person that you need to talk to about your specific requirements. Again, thank you for your time today and have a great day.